I am 60, 3 years old. I have worked with my hands my entire life. Rough hands, calloused hands, the kind of hands that tell a story without saying a single word. I drove a delivery truck for 31 years. Same company, same route, more or less. I never missed a day unless my body absolutely forced me to stay home. I paid every bill. I raised my children. I kept my head down, and I never, not once, asked anyone for anything I hadn't earned. My name is Harold Mercer, and on the night of October the 14th, I was asleep in my own bed, in my own house, in the same neighborhood I had lived in for 27 years. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, and then the door came off its hinges. I'm not exaggerating when I say that. I heard a crash so loud I thought the ceiling was coming down. My wife, Loretta, screamed and grabbed my arm in the dark. I sat up. My heart was hammering. I was 60, 3 years old, and I'd been a heavy sleeper my whole life. But that sound, that crash, pulled me out of the deepest sleep like a hook through water. Before I could even reach for the lamp, there were lights. Bright, white, blinding lights. Flashlight beams sweeping across the room like we were criminals hiding in the dark. And then the voices came. Harold Mercer, don't move. Hands where we can see them. Get on the ground, now. Loretta was screaming. I was trying to tell her it was okay, even though I had absolutely no idea if it was okay. My hands were up. I kept saying it. I'm not moving. I'm not moving. I'm right here. And still they came at me. 3 officers. Maybe 4. The room was chaos. They pulled me off the bed. I was in my pajamas. Old plaid pajamas that my daughter had bought me 3 Christmases ago. I had no shoes, no glasses. Without my glasses I can barely see past 10 feet. Everything was a blur of motion and shouting, and Loretta crying behind me. They put the handcuffs on me right there in the bedroom. Cold metal on my wrists. I hadn't felt anything like that in my life. I am not a man who has ever been in trouble with the law. A parking ticket, maybe, once or twice over the years. That's it. That is the full extent of my criminal history. What is happening? I kept asking. Can someone please tell me what is happening? Nobody answered me. They walked me through my own house, past the hallway where the family photos hang, past the living room where my grandkids sleep when they visit, and out through the front door. And that's when I saw them, the neighbors. It was 3 in the morning, but half the street was awake. Mrs. Patterson from next door was standing on her porch in her bathrobe, hand over her mouth. The Acaffer family across the street, good people. I'd known them for 15 years. They were watching from their driveway. There were 2 police cars with their lights going, red and blue bouncing off every house on the block. And then I saw Loretta. She had followed us outside. She was in her nightgown. She had her phone in her hand, and she was filming everything, tears running down her face, and she was saying my name, Harold, Harold, Harold. Like she thought if she said it enough times, this would stop being real. I wanted to say something to her. I wanted to tell her I loved her. I wanted to tell her not to worry. But there was a hand on my head pushing me into the back of the police car, and the door closed, and I watched through the window as my wife stood in our driveway at 3 in the morning, holding up her phone, watching her husband of 30, 8 years get taken away. I said nothing. What was there to say? Let me tell you who I am before I tell you what happened next. Because I think you deserve to know the whole man before you judge any piece of him. I grew up poor, not the kind of poor that people talk about casually. I mean genuinely, deeply poor. My father worked in a textile mill, and my mother cleaned houses. We lived in a small house with 3 bedrooms and 5 children, and there were winters where the heat didn't always work, and we wore extra socks to bed, and didn't complain because complaining wouldn't make the heater work any faster. But my parents had dignity. That's the word I'd use, dignity. My father never raised his voice in anger. My mother never spoke badly about anyone, even people who deserved it. They taught me that a man who keeps his peace keeps his power. They taught me that silence in the face of insult is not weakness. It is strength that the insulter simply cannot understand. I carried that with me my whole life. I married Loretta when I was 25. She was 22, and she had a laugh like a bell, and she made the best peach cobbler in the county. I say that with full seriousness and zero exaggeration. We were not rich, we never were, but we built something together, a home, a family, a life that was ours. We had 2 children. Our daughter, Renee, is 51 now. She lives about 40 minutes away, and she calls every Sunday without fail. She's a good woman. She got her mother's stubbornness and her grandfather's heart, and I couldn't be more proud of her. And then there's our son, Marcus. Marcus is 47, and Marcus is the reason this story gets complicated. Marcus was always the shining one. You know what I mean. Some children just have a light about them that the whole world seems to notice. Marcus was smart. He was charming. He got good grades without trying too hard. He went to college on a partial scholarship, and he worked the rest of it off. And when he graduated, he got a job at a firm downtown, and he just kept climbing. I was proud. Lord, I was proud. But somewhere along the way, I couldn't tell you exactly when, the climbing changed him. He married a woman named Diana 5 years ago. Diana comes from money, real money, old money. The kind of family that has a different set of expectations about everything, the way you dress, the way you talk, the way you hold your fork. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying it's different from where I come from. And Diana, from the very beginning, looked at me the way people look at something they don't quite know what to do with. Polite, always. Polite in the way that costs nothing and means nothing. She never said anything cruel outright. She never had to. It was in the way she'd pause before touching anything in my house, the way she'd look at Loretta's cooking like she was being asked to eat something unfamiliar, the way she'd steer Marcus away from conversations with me at family gatherings, and Marcus let her. That was the thing that broke something small and quiet in my chest. Not Diana's behavior. She was who she was. But Marcus let it happen. The boy I had stayed up with through fevers. The boy I had driven to every baseball practice for 6 years. The boy I had taken out of college debt so he could start his career clean. He let his wife make his father feel small, and he said nothing. I said nothing either, because I am Harold Mercer, and Harold Mercer keeps his peace. 6 months before that night in October, things had gotten worse. Marcus and Diana had bought a new house, a big, beautiful house in a nice part of town, and there was a conversation. I don't need to get into all the details, but the short version is that Loretta and I had a piece of property, a small plot of land that my father had left me. It wasn't worth a fortune, but it was worth something, and Marcus knew that. He came to us with papers. He wanted us to sign the land over to him. He said it was for tax purposes. He said it would benefit the whole family. He had a lawyer explain it to us, Diana's family's lawyer, and the man talked so fast and used so many words that I could see Loretta getting lost and confused. I asked for time to look it over. Marcus got impatient. Diana got quiet in that particular way of hers that meant she was displeased. "Dad," Marcus said, and there was an edge in his voice I hadn't heard before, "we need this done. It's not a big deal. You're not even using that land. It belonged to my father," I said quietly. "And now it belongs to you, and you're not doing anything with it. We can put it to use." I looked at my son for a long moment. He held my gaze for about 3 seconds and then looked away. "Let me think about it," I said. We left without signing. After that, the calls got less frequent. The Sunday dinners we used to have, the ones Marcus and Diana had started attending less and less over the years, stopped altogether. When I called Marcus, he answered half the time. The other half, Diana would text back on his phone to say he was busy. Loretta cried about it when she thought I wasn't listening. I heard her every time, back in the police car. We drove for about 20 minutes. I sat in the back, with my hands cuffed behind me, still in my plaid pajamas, still without my glasses. One officer sat in the front and said nothing the entire drive. I asked twice where we were going. Both times, silence. I stopped asking. We pulled into the station. They walked me inside, through a big open room with fluorescent lights that buzzed and flickered. It was the middle of the night, but there were people everywhere, officers moving around, a man in the corner yelling about his rights, a woman crying quietly on a bench. They sat me down at a desk. I waited. No one told me anything for almost 40 minutes. I sat there in my pajamas under those buzzing lights, and I tried to stay calm. I thought about Loretta. I thought about whether she had called Renee. I hoped she hadn't woken up the grandkids. I thought about Marcus for just a moment, and then I stopped. Finally, a door opened, and a man came through it. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s. He had his sleeves rolled up, and he was carrying a manila folder that was thick with papers. He sat down across from me without introducing himself and opened the folder and started reading. I watched his face. He read the first page. His expression didn't change much. He turned to the second page, and about halfway down the second page, something shifted. His eyes went very still. He stopped moving. He read one section, then went back and read it again. Then he slowly looked up at me. He looked at me for a moment, the way you look at something when you suddenly realize you've made a terrible mistake. He closed the folder. He stood up. He went to the doorway and called out to the officers who had brought me in. "Get these cuffs off him." One of the officers frowned. "Sir, the complaint was—" I said, "Remove the cuffs, now." His voice was quiet, but there was no room in it for argument. The officer came over, and the cuffs came off my wrists. I rubbed them slowly, one then the other. The detective, I still didn't know his name, sat back down and looked at me with an expression I can only describe as tired regret. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "I've got nothing to hide," I said. "I never have," he nodded. "The complaint that was filed against you tonight, do you have any idea who might have filed it?" I looked at him. "What was the complaint?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Financial fraud," he said. "Specifically, forging documents related to a property transfer." The room went very still around me. I understood now. I understood exactly what had happened, and exactly who had made it happen, and the understanding settled into my chest like a stone dropping into deep water. "No splash, no noise, just wait. The property," I said quietly. "The complaint was filed 3 days ago," he said, "by a Marcus Mercer. My son had called the police on me." I want to pause here, because I need you to understand what it feels like to sit across from a stranger in a police station at 3 in the morning and hear that your own child, the child you raised, the child you sacrificed for, has accused you of a crime. There are no words big enough for that. But here is what I know about myself. I am Harold Mercer, and Harold Mercer does not fall apart in front of strangers. I sat up straighter in that chair. "What's in the file?" I asked. The detective looked at me with a kind of careful respect. "Mr. Mercer," he said slowly, "what is in this file is the reason we're having a very different conversation than the one we were supposed to have tonight." He opened the folder again and turned it toward me. "This complaint was filed against you for allegedly forging documents on a land title. But when our records team pulled the background standard procedure, they found something." He pointed to a document near the top of the pile. This land, the property in question, it was never just your father's property, was it? I looked at the document. Even without my glasses, I recognized it. I had kept a copy in my files for 40 years. No, I said, it wasn't. And here is where the truth comes out. Here is the twist in this story that I never wanted to have to use, but that God, in his particular way of doing things, had apparently decided needed to be known. That land my father left me, that small plot of land that Marcus wanted so badly, my father hadn't just left it to me. 40 years ago, before I was married, before Marcus was born, my father had registered that land under a specific deed, a historical preservation deed, linked to a community land trust that had been set up in our county in the 1960s during the civil rights movement. My grandfather had been one of the original signatories of that trust. The land had historical designation. It could not be privately transferred, sold, or developed without a full review by the County Historical Board and the consent of 3 other families whose ancestors had signed the original trust agreement. Marcus didn't know this. Diana's lawyer hadn't found it. Or if they had found it, they hadn't told Marcus, which made me wonder things about Diana's family's lawyer that I will not say out loud. But more than that, more than all of that, that land trust, it had a provision, clause that had been written in by my grandfather himself, a man I never met, but who apparently had the wisdom of someone who knew exactly what families could do to each other when money got involved. The clause said this: if any legal action is taken by a blood relative to claim, seize, or contest ownership of this land through means other than standard inheritance, all rights to the land revert immediately and permanently to a community fund designated by the original trustees. Marcus had filed a police complaint. That was a legal action against his own father over the land. The detective looked at me. Your son's complaint, Mr. Mercer, by filing it, he may have triggered a clause that removes any future claim he or any direct relative has to this property, permanently. Our records team flagged it immediately because the deed is registered with the County Historical Society, and it came up in the background search. He leaned back in his chair. I've been doing this job for 11 years, he said quietly. I've never seen anything quite like this. I sat with that for a moment. My grandfather, a man who picked cotton as a boy and lived through things I can barely imagine, had written a clause into a land deed 60 years ago that had just protected me from my own son. I thought about that quiet, dignified man whose photograph sits on my dresser, and I felt, for the first time that night, something loosen in my chest. Part 5, Going Home music, slow, emotional, building the detective. His name was Detective Rains, drove me home himself. He didn't have to do that. He could have had an officer take me or called a car, but he drove me himself, and on the way he said very little, which I respected. He asked if I was all right. I said I was fine. He said he was sorry for how the night had gone. I thanked him. We pulled up to my house at 5:30 in the morning. There was a light on in the living room. Detective Rains shook my hand before I got out. Mr. Mercer, he said, I'm going to need you to come back in this week, just to sign some paperwork, make a formal statement, but you're not in any trouble. You understand that? I understand, I said, and for what it's worth. He added, and he paused like he was choosing his words carefully. Whoever filed that complaint against you made a very significant mistake. I nodded. I thanked him again, and I walked up the driveway. Loretta was at the door before I reached it. She came out to meet me, and she wrapped both her arms around me, and I could feel her whole body shaking, not with cold, even though the October air was sharp, but with relief. She had been crying all night. I could tell from her eyes, from the way her breath came in uneven waves. Harold, she whispered. I'm home, Loretta, I said. I didn't know what to do. I called Renee. She's inside. Renee was in the living room, still in the clothes she'd driven over in the middle of the night. She stood up when I came in and walked straight to me and hugged me hard. My daughter, my good faithful girl, Daddy, she said, and her voice cracked. I'm all right, I said. I'm all right. I sat down on the couch. Loretta sat beside me and kept her hand in mine. Renee sat across from me, and I looked at the two of them, my wife of 38 years and my daughter who drove 40 minutes in the dark to be here, and something in me was very full and very heavy at the same time. Did Marcus call? I asked. Loretta and Renee exchanged a look. No, Loretta said. Did you call him? Another pause. I tried. Loretta said. He didn't pick up. Diana texted back and said, she said, her voice faltered. What did she say, Loretta? She said this is a family matter, and the authorities will sort it out. I sat with that. I nodded slowly. All right, I said. All right, Harold, your son. I know, Loretta. He called the police on you. I know. I patted her hand gently. Let me tell you what happened. And I told them, both of them, everything, the file, the deed, my grandfather's clause. What Detective Raines had said. I told them all of it quietly, without drama, without anger in my voice. When I finished, Renee was staring at me. Grandpa's clause, she said softly. She shook her head slowly. He knew, he actually knew. He knew what families could do. I said, he wanted to protect against it. Loretta was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, what happens now? Now, I said, we sleep, and then we see what Marcus does next. Marcus called at 11 the next morning. Not me, he called Renee first. Renee told me about it later, word for word, the way she always does. He had called her to ask how Dad was doing, which told me he already knew the arrest hadn't gone the way he planned, because if it had, he wouldn't be calling to check on me. He'd be calling to claim a victory. Renee told him to call me directly. He waited until 2 in the afternoon. I was in the backyard when my phone rang. Sitting in the old lawn chair I've had for 20 years, the one with the plastic fraying on the armrests. The October sun was thin and pale, but it was still there. I let the phone ring 3 times before I answered it. Dad, Marcus, silence. How are you feeling? He asked, and his voice had a quality. I recognized the voice of a man who wants to ask something else entirely, but hasn't figured out how to get there yet. I'm fine, I said. Good, good. That's I heard there was some kind of mix-up last night. A mix-up. Is that what you heard? I said. Dad, I want you to know the complaint. It was meant to get things moving, legally. I had a lawyer advise me that, Marcus. He stopped. You called the police on your father. The silence that followed was long and terrible. I didn't think they'd. What did you think they'd do, Marcus? File a letter? They came to my house at 3 in the morning. They broke down my door. They put handcuffs on me in front of your mother. She stood in the driveway in her nightgown, and she filmed it because she didn't know what else to do. Your mother, Marcus, the woman who sat by your bed for 6 days when you had pneumonia at age 8. She watched her husband get put in a police car. I kept my voice calm. I kept it level. Every word was steady. Dad, I'm not finished. He went quiet. The detective who reviewed my file, he found something. I assume your lawyer didn't tell you about the historical deed. Or maybe he did, and he told you it wouldn't matter. But it matters, Marcus. The clause your great-grandfather wrote, the clause that says if a blood relative takes legal action to claim that land, they lose all future rights to it. That clause was triggered last night. By your complaint, the silence this time was different. It had a texture to it, a density. What? He said. His voice had gone small. You heard me. That can't. It's in the original deed, Marcus, filed with the county in 1963. Your great-grandfather put it there to protect the family from itself. Turns out he was wiser than any of us gave him credit for. I heard him breathing on the other end of the line, fast, shallow breaths. Dad, I'm not angry, I said, and this was true. I'm not. I want you to hear that clearly because I know you know me well enough to tell the difference. I'm not angry. I'm something else. I'm tired, Marcus. I'm tired in a way that doesn't have much to do with last night. I'm sorry, he said, and his voice cracked when he said it. Dad, I'm so sorry. I know. I didn't. Diana thought that if we just, she said the land was going to waste and that you were being stubborn and I know, Marcus. He was crying now. I could hear it. My 47-year-old son was crying on the phone, and I sat in my old lawn chair in the thin October sun, and I let him cry without rushing him, the same way I used to let him cry when he was small. I don't know how I let this happen, he said finally. I think you do know, I said gently. I think that's why you're crying. He didn't argue. Is she, your mother is heartbroken? I said plainly, not just from last night, from a long time of things. He was quiet. What do I do, Dad? That's between you and your conscience, I said. But I'll tell you this, an apology to me is the easy part. The people you really owe something to are your mother and your sister and yourself. I paused. And Diana, I added. Not an apology, a conversation, an honest one about what kind of man you want to be, because the man your great-grandfather was, the man your grandfather was, the man your mother and I tried to raise, that man doesn't use the police as a weapon against his own father, and somewhere inside you, you've always known that. Long silence. I love you, Dad, he said. It came out broken and raw and real. I love you too, Marcus. I said, I always have. That's never been the question. Diana called Loretta 4 days later. I won't tell you what was said in that conversation because it's not mine to tell. It was between those two women, and it needed to stay that way. But I will tell you that Loretta was on the phone for a long time, and when she came to find me in the kitchen afterward, her eyes were red, but her shoulders were different. Something in her had released, she cried. Loretta told me, the whole time. Is that right? I said. She said she didn't know the police would actually. Loretta shook her head. She thought it was just going to be a letter or a court summons, and that would have been acceptable. I asked mildly. No, Loretta said. She knows that now too. I nodded. We found out, through the County Historical Board, that Detective Raines had been exactly right. The filing of the complaint had triggered the clause, and the land, my grandfather's land, my father's land, the land my son had tried so hard to get, had been formally transferred to the community trust. It would be preserved. There would be a small memorial marker placed on it, honoring the families who had originally signed the trust agreement back in 1963. One of those families' names was Mercer. My grandfather's name would be on that marker. When I found that out, I sat in the kitchen for a long while with a cup of coffee gone cold in my hands, and I thought about a man I never met who somehow reached forward through 60 years and protected me from a night I never saw coming. I thought about dignity. I thought about how it moves through generations like water through stone, slowly, invisibly, persistently, and with a power that only becomes obvious long after the work is done. Marcus came to the house 3 weeks later. He came alone. Diana wasn't with him, and I thought that was right. Some things have to be done by a man himself, without a buffer. He stood at the door the way he used to stand at my door as a teenager when he'd broken something and had to confess it. Not quite meeting my eyes, shoulders rounded. But he was here, that mattered. Can I come in? He asked. When have I ever turned you away from this house? I said. He came in. Loretta was in the kitchen, and she stopped what she was doing, and Marcus went to her first, which was right, which told me something in him had genuinely shifted, and he held his mother, and she let him, both of them crying quietly for a minute, while I stayed in the doorway and gave them that. Then he sat across from me at the kitchen table where I had helped him with homework for years, where we had celebrated report cards and birthdays and ordinary Tuesday evenings, and he looked at me with the eyes of a man who has been looking clearly at himself for the first time in a long while, and doesn't like everything he's seen. He didn't make excuses. He didn't explain Diana's reasoning or his lawyer's advice. He just said, "I'm ashamed of what I did, Dad. I'm ashamed of who I've been, and I don't expect you to erase it. I just need you to know that I know." I looked at my son. 47 years old, successful, smart, mine. "I know you know," I said. "That's enough to start with. How do I fix it?" "You don't fix the past, Marcus. You just build something better on top of it. One day at a time, starting with, call your sister." He nodded. "Call your sister, come to Sunday dinner, put your phone away when we're talking, look your mother in the eye. That's it. That's all. That's it, son." I said, "That's everything." He stayed for dinner that night, all four of us. Loretta made her roast chicken, the one with the lemon and the herbs, and we sat at the table and we talked. Not about the land or the arrest or the complaint. We talked about things that mattered. Marcus told us about a trip Diana had been planning. Loretta told him about the neighbor's new dog. I told a story about something that had happened on my delivery route 30 years ago that I'd never told before, and Marcus laughed a real laugh, loose and unguarded, and the sound of it filled the kitchen. It wasn't fixed. One dinner doesn't fix 30 years being slowly eroded, and it doesn't fix a night like October the 14th. But it was a beginning, and beginnings are holy things if you treat them right. I am 63 years old. I have rough hands and bad eyesight and a pair of plaid pajamas I've been thinking about throwing away for obvious reasons. I drive the same truck I've had for 8 years. I sit in the same lawn chair in the same backyard on the same afternoons, watching the same light change over the same fence. And I know something now that I have always known, but that October the 14th made permanent inside me. I know that dignity does not protect you from pain. That is not what it does. My grandfather had dignity, and he still suffered. My father had dignity, and he still had hard winters. I have dignity, and I still ended up in handcuffs in my pajamas on a Tuesday night at 63 years old. But dignity is not armor. It's something else. It's the thing that's still standing when everything else has been taken. It's the thing that makes a detective stop mid-sentence and stand up straight and say, "Remove the cuffs." It's the thing that keeps your voice level when your own child has done the unthinkable. It's the thing that lets you sit at a dinner table 3 weeks later and pass the chicken without bitterness. It's the long game, and the long game, I promise you, the long game is always worth playing. My grandfather never met me. He never knew my name. He couldn't have imagined the particular circumstances of a night in October, decades after he was gone. But he loved his family enough to think 60 years ahead. He loved his family enough to protect them from things he couldn't see, but somehow knew were coming. That is what love looks like in its fullest form. Not the love that gives you everything you ask for. The love that protects you even from yourself, even from your worst moments, even from your own worst choices. What does Marcus's story teach us? It teaches us that money, land, property, inheritance, all of it, is just a story we tell about value. The real inheritance is never the land. It's what the land meant to the people who held it. It's the sacrifice, the dignity, the decades of quiet, consistent, unglamorous love. And you cannot file a police complaint against that. You cannot seize it in a legal action. It lives in the hands of anyone who has ever been kept warm by it, fed by it, shaped by it. It lives in me. It will live in my children and their children, whether they always know it or not. I'll end this with something simple, because the truth usually is. If there is a person in your life who is quiet, who absorbs what you throw at them without breaking, who stays when they could leave, who loves without condition, do not mistake their silence for weakness. Do not mistake their stillness for surrender, because somewhere in their past, someone built something into their foundation that you cannot see, something old and strong and patient, and it will outlast everything you try to do against it. Respect the quiet ones. Love the humble ones. And before you take legal action against your own father, read the deed. The night they came for me, they walked out of my house with less than they came in with, and I walked back in with everything that ever mattered.